Today, Democrats continue to grapple with these election results, and we are seeing a tradition that we always see after losing campaigns, although based on what I've seen, evidence past races, this one is more severe, and that's understandable. So there are recriminations, blame, stories being told. We'll get to some of that tonight. But there's also an immediate emphasis on resilience and a type of newfound resistance to Donald Trump that isn't just a version of the first term or a sequel of what Democrats did in that so-called resistance. And given the raw fact that Democrats lost both the White House and the Senate, we are hearing today from Democratic governors.
We will be prepared for whatever comes, and we will do everything in our power to defend the rights of Washingtonians, the people of this great state.
If you try to harm New Yorkers or roll back their rights, I will fight you every step of the way.
You come for my people, you come through me.
There you have it. And we do live in a country of federalism where states are, as we all know, but sometimes we forget how it works, separate governments. That's why they have separate police forces and a separate legal system, right? State laws. And we have governors here who are reacting, and this is fully lawful, fully within their powers as they run states, but they're reacting obviously somewhat differently from the usual thing after an election. And part of the reasoning, we think, is just the raw math I mentioned. They know that their party, the Democratic Party, is being exited out of the White House and the Senate. So the governors are stepping up. Over in California, there will actually be a special legislative session to work on policies that will maintain California's priorities, according to the governor and the Democrats who rule that state, against the incoming federal administration. Some activist groups are organizing a march trying to set a tone that there is not just a rolling over of civic activism and activity, even if the election results were decisively against certain liberal causes. And that will be January 18th in Washington, right before Trump's inauguration. And they are putting the word out now early, hoping to bring out many thousands. Democrats also are looking at the lessons. There are many ways to address a loss, and this was a decisive loss. Not a Reagan-esque mandate, and we can talk about that, but a major loss. I think that's clear. And so one of the key points that people are looking at in the Democratic Party already is the 2004 loss to George W. Bush. The Times' Ezra Klein, who has been unsparing in facing the Democrats' problems this year, including how they held on with Biden for so long, is saying, quote, "In my lifetime until today, that was the most total rejection liberals experienced. By 2004, Americans knew who Bush was and what he had done. They chose him anyway." That's roughly what happened Tuesday night. But the silver lining, say some Democrats, is that while there was a lot of Republican bragging about the supposed mandate, Bush's second term was stalled on many of those big provisions, and you know the Obama era came after that. Here's what it sounded like in those second terms.
I earned capital in the campaign, political capital, and now I intend to spend it.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
It's not unprecedented in the literal sense of the word. It was precedented. There are many precedents of people, president-elects, who've won elections at the margin of Trump. That's precedent, and at much larger margins. We are accustomed to how he may exaggerate, but it matters if people think this was a bigger win than it was, although don't mishear me, it was a decisive win. So why are we talking about 2004? Well, Democrats are reminding everyone, again, that near total low point, as the writer Ezra Klein put it, was just years away from the resurgence. In 2004, the new incoming head of the DNC after the Democrats lost was Howard Dean, and he said something that we've heard actually this week, that people with big ideas or progressive principles for America can't just wait on a savior every 4 years or only look to presidential politics. He talked about local activism, about funding it in a real way, and about competing even in places that the D.C. Democrats at the time had written off. It was called then a 50-state strategy. Democrats would go everywhere, even into deep red areas. That was controversial at the time, including by the D.C.-based sort of elite thinkers who said, well, you really got to go blue or purple. You got to keep an eye on the electoral map, yada, yada. The Washington Post at the time, we can remind you, said there was a big debate on that plan. Another outlet said that there were nasty whispers among party donors and activists who were just asking, what does Dean even mean by this, quote, crazy 50-state strategy? So that brings you all the way back to that time period and how it was considered debatable to even go out and organize on the ground. Of course, that's what the Republican pro-life movement has done. That's, by the way, what Trump did to sometimes mockery in the last year when he would go into these blue states. Is he really going to win New York or New Jersey? He didn't. But even though he didn't win those places, he improved his numbers considerably. Now, I'm not saying that Donald Trump ran a deliberate 50-state strategy. There's a lot of different sort of things that go on inside Donald Trump's campaign about where to put him and what he's doing. But it was a choice to do that very controversial closing rally inside Manhattan, a blue city that he did not win and did not expect to win. But he did improve his numbers in these other places, and Republicans are looking at that as a positive. Dean was urging Democrats to do that back before it was cool. And by the 2006 midterms, which was just 2 years later, the New York Times was writing about the vindication of that approach. Quote, Dean's 50-state love fest, his 50-state strategy helping Democrats win control of the House, the Senate, a majority of the governor's offices, and state legislatures across the nation.
The 50-state strategy is important because we want to compete everywhere. There's no place that Democrats should fear to tread anywhere in America.
Howard Dean was right in rebuilding our parties in 50 states. He did it.
He wanted a 50-state strategy. Well, he didn't get all 50 states, but he got enough of them to take back the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
The key point is that whole thing came out of a loss. And while most people don't, in sports and politics or most other endeavors, deliberately court a big loss, sometimes it is losses that force the reckoning, larger changes, the cliches like necessity is the mother of invention, all that stuff. And then it was that loss that the Democrats dealt Republicans that had Bush leaders like Karl Rove talking about what they had to learn from Dean.
I hate to say it, but we need to copy what Howard Dean did, and that is make our ground game in all 50 states. Look, we didn't have a ground game in a lot of these states with Senate races, and so we lost North Dakota by 3,300 votes. We need to have a better ground game in all 50 states.
Now, that is one component of several that you would look at during these times. There was also fatigue with the Iraq War. The win in those midterms set up a certainly wider energy for the Democrats. They were on offense, and that's when they looked beyond what at the time would have been the more establishment figure in Hillary Clinton to embrace Barack Obama, and that also worked. All these things are interconnected. None of them can be planned. We have to have intellectual humility. I told you that before the election when we were covering this night after night and saying it looked pretty close, pretty tied. And it was pretty close, except Donald Trump had the better of the battlegrounds, as people know. So what could we learn from this history? As I tell you, Democrats are looking to governors. Dean famously was a governor and then ran for president. And ultimately, as all those things worked, he became party chair. It's the kind of night after a week like this where you might want to check in with someone either close to Dean or who worked on his campaigns, or maybe Howard Dean himself, governor, doctor, and chair of the DNC. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. We missed you.
You remember all that?
Yeah, I do remember all that. And it was met with scorn and derision inside the Beltway. And inside the Beltway are always the last people to figure out what's really going on in the country.
What I'm just turning your volume up. Don't mind me. I'm just doing this here. What else do you think applies now?
I actually think that the 50-state strategy has gone into some disrepair. Unfortunately, President Obama, who was a terrific president, but he didn't have a lot of use for the DNC and tried to set up a parallel organization. The DNC essentially fell apart for about 8 years. And it's got to be rebuilt. But the problem with the DNC is it's an inside the Beltway organization still. And I'm actually working with some people who were involved in my campaign and who were involved with the DNC that I ran to try to figure out how we're going to do what the Republicans did. I saw the clip of Rose saying we ought to do what Howard Dean did. Well, we now have to do what the Republicans did. The Republicans have run a real 50-state strategy for quite some time. And what they do that we don't, although we try, but our setup isn't right for it. They run candidates for every office in the United States of America, often financed by billionaires like the Koch brothers. But they run for the school board, they run for state representative, they run for city council. We have to do that. Clausewitz once said that politics is simply war by another means. The Republicans learned that lesson and they practice it. We have yet to do that. I actually think Harris ran a very good campaign. I don't criticize it. And I don't think the DNC did a terrible job. I don't criticize the DNC. But we are still not in the state. Giving the states money is not enough because a lot of the state parties aren't working properly, partly because they don't have money. So we have to set up an organization, which may be a parallel organization that's outside Washington and that is well financed. And I think the business community, the Democrats and the business community, are going to get this before the people inside the Beltway. I don't want to diss the people inside the Beltway too much, but it is middle school on steroids. They're smart, they work hard, and it's all about them all the time, even the people I like. You have to focus not on the next senatorial race, but you've got to focus on the state senator races. In Missouri, and if you show up at their door consistently, eventually you're going to win. And that happens, and it is going to happen, but we have to finance it, and we have to build it. And it cannot be run out of Washington.